Hey everyone, welcome back to Kissing Sustainability. Great to have you with me. So today we're going to talk about carbon emissions. Last video we managed to establish that climate change is absolutely being driven by human activity. And so today we're just going to dive into a little bit about the carbon emissions. So carbon dioxide is by far the largest influencer of the greenhouse gas effect, which is what is causing global heating. So what's happened to carbon dioxide levels over recent times? Well, in pre-industrial times, which is kind of beginning of the 1800s, a couple of hundred years ago, before the Industrial Revolution, carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were about 280 parts per million. Now that's changed significantly, and over the last 50 years we've seen that there's been a 27% increase from about 325 parts per million up to 416 parts per million in 2021. So that's an enormous change in just that 50-year period. And if you think about that, 416 versus the 280, that's an enormous percentage increase versus where we were in pre-industrial times. And that carbon dioxide effectively acts like a blanket. It keeps the earth warmer. So as the sun's energy comes in, less of it can escape to space, and it keeps the planet hotter. So the more carbon dioxide we emit, the warmer, the hotter the planet gets, with all of the impacts that come along with that. Now, if we increase the same amount in the next 50 years that we've increased in the last 50 years, we'd hit 506 parts per million. That would absolutely guarantee us a 3 degrees centigrade hotter planet on average than we had in pre-industrial times. And that's based on a Yale study that was completed. So if that occurred, bear in mind that we're at 1.1 at the moment, just consider the impacts that would have across the planet. And we've seen the horrendous floods that are happening in Pakistan as a result of the glaciers melting. We've seen the heat waves that we've had across Europe. We've seen wildfires in the Arctic, in Australia, in California, even in the UK, in France, etc. These are huge impacts which are directly linked to global heating. And another thing that's worth considering, in a 3 degrees hotter world, 1/4 of the world's population will experience extreme drought for at least 1 month each year. And that means, of course, that there'll be massive impacts on food, on supply chains, and likely big impacts on migration as well. Also, that 35-degree wet bulb temperature will happen regularly in parts of the world such as the UAE, Pakistan, the Gulf, Mexico, and even Florida in the southeast USA. Now, why does a 35-degree wet bulb temperature matter? What does that mean? Well, it basically means the temperature of a thermometer if it's damp, if it's got water on it. Why is that important? Well, because we know that water evaporating cools us down. That's why we sweat. And so if a thermometer, even when it's wet like that, is registering 35 degrees or more, then what that means is the human body, even through sweating, can't cool itself down. In other words, if you're outside in those temperatures, you don't have any air conditioning, eventually you die. And large parts of the world, including some of the richest parts of the world like Florida, will be impacted by this. And so of course we will see tens of millions of climate migrants who are heading for the developed world, the rich countries, just to get away from these horrendous temperatures, rising sea levels, storm surges, floods, food shortages, etc. So in all sorts of areas there are going to be massive impacts. Now you might think, okay, not a problem. We know that if that happens, then there would be issues. But actually, everyone's on top of CO2 and it's going to be coming down. Well, no, unfortunately. In 2021, we had the highest CO2 emissions in history. Okay, 2018, 2019 were broadly the same, but that's because we were still in the middle of a global pandemic. And 2022, yeah, they've gone back up again, and we've seen the highest ever recorded CO2 emissions, 421 parts per million in May of 2022. So yes, there are lots of great targets, but there are far fewer plans and even less action. And we need to see action from everybody, all countries around the world, and we should never lose sight of the fact that countries like the US and the UK per capita have got the highest ever emissions in history. And that's important because it's the CO2 in the atmosphere today which is causing this, and we are the two largest emitters per capita in history. So we all have an absolute obligation to take as much action as we can. And why? Well, it's going to impact every single one of us, and certainly our children and our grandchildren. And as I've covered before, I love my children. I don't have grandchildren yet, but I'm pretty sure I'll love them when they arrive at some point in the future. And I want the planet to be in a great place for them. So please keep watching these videos, hit on that like button, hit on subscribe, and let me know if you've got any questions or any comments. And until next time, keep kissing sustainability.